So it is a blessing to be here today. I'm grateful to have had Manny as a student. I would tell you as a seminary prof that one of my greatest joys is to be a small part of lives that God is using for His glory in various parts of the vineyard, and to see them flourish and do well. And lots of folks are part of men like Manny, but it just is a joy, and that's part of what I've asked God to help me lead an eternally significant life and to live with the world as my vineyard. And instead of, I thought we'd go to the overseas and train leaders, and the Lord, through a unique set of events, guided my wife and my family to stay here, but multiplying lives through folks like Manny. So thank you for the blessing of being in your life, and thank you for coming to hear what God's put in my heart. I am wanting to make sure that as we think about what's going on here in the session, is it does relate to the trustworthiness of Scripture. And I'm going to be much more reliant on my notes than our dear brother was in the last hour. But that's just, you got to figure who you are and who you aren't, right? So there's a lot more material than I can cover methodically, but what I want you to do is to think with me about the way the Bible is reliable. And so when we think about that, I'm going to start with the background for this issue. You have notes. You have notes, and so the PowerPoint is a subset of the notes. I've highlighted certain things in your notes. I've added some things and some images that aren't in your notes, and so this kind of helps you keep track with where we are in the notes, and then some detours. So when we think about, by the way, just when I start, when I think about talking about what archaeology does and doesn't do, I want you to know that what's most important to me is what the Bible says about itself. As far as what I conclude what the Bible is that the Bible is an inspired, inerrant, authoritative, infallible revelation of God to us through His servants. And because of what He says about it in various passages of Scripture, I take that as at face level. Archaeology isn't necessary for me, but I think it's an encouragement to see some of that confirmation that's possible in the wake of a world. And this is what triggered my interest first in doing this, is all those Discovery and History Channel shows that about made me pull my hair out. What a thing to watch before you go to bed when I'm just... and so I wanted to, and I first started thinking about this, I wanted to help people realize there's another take on the evidence that's there that, yes, is limited. And that take is that we can be encouraged that there is a configuration of archaeological information that matches what the Bible says, doesn't prove it, and that's the undercurrent here for the whole thing. So I just want to give a background to this question of, does archaeology help affirm the trustworthiness of Scripture? I want you to realize there's an ongoing debate about the Bible's reliability throughout biblical scholarship. As somebody who loves biblical studies, who's interested in the intersection of history and archaeology, I think this subject deserves attention, because in all the various kinds of media, and both printed and visual media, you have sweeping statements that are made, and I'm going to read some of them to you, that they would present as if it's gospel, to use that idiomatically, that there's a disjuncture between archaeology and the Bible. And here's one for you. Well, there we go. Okay, back. There we go. Here's a quote that just seems to fly in the face of that. According to Ron Hendel, archaeology this is a liberal, archaeology did not illumine the times and events of Abraham, Moses, and Joshua. Rather, it helped to show that these times and events are largely unhistorical. The more we know about the Bronze and Early Iron Ages, which would be patriarchal conquest into the monarchy period, the more we know about the Bronze and Early Iron Ages, the more the biblical portrayals of events in this area appear to be a blend of folklore and cultural memory, in which the details of historical events have either disappeared or been radically reshaped. The stories are deeply meaningful, but only occasionally historical. Archaeological research has, against the intentions of most of its practitioners, secured the non-historicity of much of the Bible before the era of the kings, and not a whole lot after that. All right, and so I just wanted, that's the background, and I could, those quotes multiply in various venues. But I want you to realize that when we think about this next thing, about evangelicals do not need to attempt to prove the historicity of the Bible, I want you to understand that that's something we want to avoid at all costs. I think the Bible, because of what it says about itself, encourages me to accept it as an authority that God has given in my life that's inspired and inerrant. But this archaeological evidence, even though it doesn't prove what the Bible is, it does kind of confirm it. There's a ring of truth. There's an encouragement by seeing this legitimate take on the evidence that's there, the intersection of history and archaeology, that works with what the Bible says. So the Bible is at the top of the pile, and archaeology is down from the top of the pile, not as the ultimate authority, but as kind of an encouragement. And so I would say archaeological evidence, in my mind, does not rule out the scenario presented by Scripture, but it points to the feasibility or plausibility that the people and the events described in the Bible actually lived, and it happened actually that way. So, I also want to say that this isn't on the screen, sorry, but everyone brings in an interpretive bias when it comes to the science of archaeology. I would tell you, having been minimally involved in archaeological digs, it is an amazingly scientific endeavor. It's done in a very advanced way using multiple technologies with painstaking records. But it's the interpretation of the evidence that's more of an art than a science, right? And even a summary of a quote I have in my notes is, you don't have in yours, but this liberal writes that an archaeological discovery taken by itself provides the basis for only general conclusions. A consideration of the written source in conjunction with the archaeological discovery, like the Bible, will provide many specifics. So an archaeological discovery is like an Italian with his hands tied. He can't talk, right? Nope. I can't talk with my hands tied. So an archaeological discovery by nature is mute. It doesn't talk. It can't give us specifics. You need to marry it up with the text. And of course, at that point in time, your assumptions about the text are all important in how you're going to understand that archaeological evidence. That's just part of the game. And liberals even don't always admit it, but this guy did. But I want you to, the next thing in your notes is always keep in mind the fractional, the limited nature of archaeological evidence, and you'll see why I think this is important in a moment. First of all, remember, keep in mind when you see the Discovery shows and the History Channel shows and read some things in printed media, remember how little of what was left by ancient civilizations has been found and understood. In a scholar down at Miami University in Ohio, in his book, The Stones and the Scriptures, he had this chapter, these 5 headings in this chapter. And you have them on the screen there that I'm getting behind, sorry. These 5 headings, he's going through this whole process of what's deposited and discovered and reaches publication. So you think about of all that, let's say, Pastor Manny and his family, okay? They live life, and there's a volcanic eruption, and it buries their house and the neighborhood in this church, okay? So 1,000 years later, archaeologists are going to come, they're going to dig in this area, they're going to find this and that and the other thing of Manny Pereira's life. So the point is the fraction that has even survived, how much has been carried off by critters, how much is burned, how much is blown away, how much is just decomposed. The fraction of what was left behind by an ancient civilization that survived, and out of that, just think about the land of Israel, for example, that just a fraction of places that have even been surveyed with a crew of folks from a university class kind of 10 feet apart, walking over hill, over dale, looking for rocks sticking out, organized rocks, like a wall sticking out of the ground. There are scores of parts of just Israel that are blank spots. They haven't even surveyed. And then the fraction of those places that have been surveyed, that have actually been excavated, which takes thousands upon thousands of dollars, and they have probably 20 or 30 digs going on every summer, but they can only do so much. And the fraction of that has been actually examined, considered, and then the fraction of that has been published in some consumable form. What's left? I mean, it's just a fragment of what was deposited. And so, the picture here, the iceberg analogy, I'm saying when you look at that iceberg, it's not just the fact that the iceberg, a big part of it is below the water. I'm saying all but the tippy top of the iceberg, all that below the tippy top of the iceberg is what has not seen the light of day. It was deposited by former civilizations. In the very top part of that iceberg, how much evidence has been uncovered through archaeology. And it's important to keep that fragmentary nature of evidence when we're thinking about a scripture and we're thinking about maybe overthrowing the clear statement of scripture by something found or not found in archaeology. It's a built-in methodological challenge we have to keep in mind. And then we have, oops, I got to point it that way, sorry. This whole issue of, should we be surprised? You mean they didn't leave things behind intending on us finding them? Alan Millard has this great quote. One aspect of archaeological evidence in need of constant recognition is its random nature. Think of the Manny Pereira illustration with a volcanic eruption, which I sure am not hoping for. Ancient people did not bury their possessions so that archaeologists might discover them. Now, you think about leaving home this morning. Did you leave things in a nice full array so if there was a tragedy and it was covered by lava and somebody came back later, they would know, oh yeah, that's what the Grisantis are like because everything is there in ordered form. Nor did they leave in their houses or their tombs fully representative selections of all their belongings, except maybe the Egyptians who wanted to take it all with them. What the archaeologist can recover, therefore, is only partial and always incomplete evidence for ancient activities. So, we shouldn't be surprised at the random nature. And then the third thing is suspicion or confidence. What do we conclude based on what we do not find? A set of historians talked about the general paucity, the limitation of the archaeological record with regard to the Solomonic period, for example. David and Solomon are highly questioned by these liberal critics. And that general limitation that there isn't much found for their period of time is well known in archaeological historical circles. And it's come to have an important place in recent discussion of Israelite history that tends to ask, this is what the horse or the cart comes first, tends to ask for corroboration of the text by external sources like archaeology before the text is taken seriously, rather than asking whether evidence shows that the text should not be taken seriously. There's this hermeneutics of suspicion. I mean, Dr. White was talking about, historical sources, talking about Thucydides and Pliny and, Tacitus and others, and they're regarded with great respect and authority across the board, and their writings are hundreds of years after they're originally written. And the Bible is given this, until you can prove it from archaeology, I don't believe it. But that's part of the game out there. We have to realize that. And so as you think about this issue of evidence, I just wanted to encourage you that, and this statement occurs in numerous kinds of disciplines, but the absence of evidence does not equal evidence of absence. So the fact that they haven't found something doesn't mean it didn't exist. And it's important to keep that in mind, because that's going to be a part of the argument I'm going to critique. And it just isn't a kind of a way of making conclusions that's always bad. Now, I'm not the most observant guy in the world. My kids love to tease me about that. If they change the furniture around, it's like, let's see if Dad notices. Sometimes when my wife gives herself a haircut, I get to go into the bathroom and see the hair in the garbage, and I can get myself out of the hole ahead of time. Oh, hon, you cut your hair. So the fact that I don't say something shouldn't always be a point of judgment for me, right? It shouldn't be just because I didn't observe this that I'm an automatically bad guy. No, I should be more observant. I'm not using that to defend myself. But in life, we don't want to have our communication be determined by what we didn't say. The Bible, we shouldn't interpret the Bible predominantly or in a big way on what was not said. We're looking for biblical affirmations, right? We want to see what the Bible is affirming in the text and not leave the white space alone as far as our conclusions are concerned. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at two major realms of biblical history, the conquest period, first of all, and then United Monarchy period. And what I want to do in those two periods is just consider the ways scholars have approached those in a negative way and pursue an attempt to show a configuration of events matching history with archaeology in a way that's plausible. And when I say it's plausible or feeble, I'm not trying to be a wimp. What I'm trying to say is this archaeology is never fundamentally required for me. I go to bed at night and sleep fine, whether this or that thing was found in archaeology, because of my trust in God's word, and God is the God who gave it in an unparalleled, flawless way. I want to make sure, though, that as we talk about these cross-pollination points, these intersections of archaeology and history, that they're encouraging, but they aren't, determinative in how we view Scripture. So, let's then look at the conquest of Canaan, first of all, the late Bronze period. I'll come back to those late and middle Bronze periods in a moment. But the scholarly consensus, the non-conservative consensus about this period of time is that many critical biblical scholars, non-conservative biblical scholars, and almost all archaeologists, the vast majority of archaeologists in the larger world, dismiss the historicity of biblical descriptions of the Israelite conquest of Jericho and Ai in Joshua 6 and 7. And that consensus is that Israel didn't begin to exist as a nation, as they call that. The Ashkenazi term is their ethnogenesis, their beginning as a nation. It didn't happen until at least 1200 BC or later. It was this evolutionary process that happened in no way that matches what the Bible said happened. Moses leading 12 tribes out of Egypt and experiencing what the events of the Pentateuch talk about, and then conquering the land of Canaan in some fashion. And so you have this quote, for example, by John Van Cedars, who says, "There's no justification." And you can just feel the sweepingness of these statements that I think are totally bogus. And the background of the statement is a number of scholars would say that the Pentateuch didn't come into being until after the exile, or in the exile and later, and was a historian from way over here that kind of reconstructed the narrative and the laws of the Pentateuch much after the fact, and the histories of Deuteronomy through Kings by this person way over here in the exile or later. That's his assumption, and the assumption of many liberal scholars. You'll just hear it coming through, and that's one of the reasons why he says, give me a break. There's no way he gets it right. He's just making all this stuff up, so it's not reliable historically. Well, look at archaeology, friend. There's no justification for trying to associate archaeological ruins at the end of the late Bronze Age with a conquest narrative written about 600 or 700 years later. The Deuteronomistic historian, the guy over here that wrote from the time of the exile, did not have any records from Israel's earliest period. Nor did he follow oral traditions. How does he know that? The invasion of the land of Canaan by Israel and Joshua was an invention of this Deuteronomistic historian. The conquest narrative is a good example of ancient historiography. They told stories really well, but it cannot pass for historical by any modern criteria of historical examination. So that's the scholarly world we're encountering, and you're going to see in some of the Discovery Channel shows along the way. So I want to think about the date of the destruction of Jericho. And again, be more specific, the scholarly consensus is, these two guys, Coogan says, archaeology does not allow this passage, Joshua 6, to be read as a factual account of events connected with the entrance of the Israelite tribes into Canaan. John Strange says, it goes without saying, well, duh, that the book of Joshua as such does not relate any actual conquest or division of the promised land to Joshua. Everybody agrees on that, except the guys with their head in the sand like you and me. Okay, so then let's think about, in the wake of that, the history of excavating Jericho. And what I'm trying to do with these, like, 3 examples or so, is I'm trying to fly through the information, and hopefully we're going to post the notes on the website and the PowerPoint PDF slides with have some images. We'll post those and a couple of things I have at the end of the presentation just to give you something to go back to. But when you think about this history of excavating Jericho, because these are part of the divided point, I want you to realize here that there are 2 archaeological periods, the Middle Bronze Age and the Late Bronze Age, that relate to this question. Middle Bronze really is generally the time of the patriarchs and the sojourn in Egypt. If according to my chronology, Abram showed up in Canaan in 2091 BC, and by the time you get to 1550 BC, that's around before Moses is born. And then the Late Bronze Age is just before Moses is born, all the way through the time of the Judges. All right, so we're going to see that there were 5 digs. 5 teams of archaeologists have excavated at Jericho. There's 1 there now. Sadly, it's the Italians. I'm an Italian, but I'm not happy with their conclusions. The 2 I want to focus on is John Garstang and then Kathleen Kenyon. John Garstang is one of them who dug in a residential area until Jericho. And by the way, Garstang wasn't even a believer. He was an atheist. He came as an archaeologist from a university. So he had no fundamentalist axe to grind here. He dug in a residential area and concluded that the destruction and wall collapse that was in every area he dug occurred in around 1400 BC, the Late Bronze Age, that, as a matter of fact, matches the biblical narrative and what I would consider a biblical chronology. 1400 BC, Late Bronze Age. Kathleen Kenyon, a student of his, came in the 1960s to Jericho, dug 2 26-foot square areas, concluded that this destruction occurred 150 years earlier in the Middle Bronze Age, and guess what? Has 0 to do with what Joshua 6 refers to. It was something else. They don't know who did it. They have no concept of all the details that went into it, but it has nothing to do with Joshua. And let's talk about her evidence. How does she come to that? Well, first of all, just let me give you a little bit of an idea of some areas of fundamental agreement. It's interesting how there are lots of areas as far as the evidence that's found there. We would say, you look at Joshua 6 and what they found there, and it's like, whoa, that's an amazing correlation. And the difference is going to be the dating decision based fundamentally and most importantly on pottery. So here's areas of fundamental agreement. You have, at some point in time, Israel had 2 walls made of stone. I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. Went to the top of the hill and the bottom of the hill, toward the bottom of the hill. And for a long time, that was meant to be like a no man's land that would help them shoot with reckless abandon if somebody happens to make it through the first wall. And then as the city grew, that became, guess what, the low rent district. Guess who probably lived there? Rahab, most likely. And so there's 2 walls that were obstacles. We're going to see a couple of images of them, but they're big walls built on stone ramparts. And you got to go through 2 of them to get to the city. Second area of fundamental agreement, Jericho is destroyed. A wall made of mud bricks that was built at the top of the stone revetment in the bottom of the hill that were big obstacles collapsed and became ramps, contributing to the destruction of the city. And then 3, they found many jars full of grain burned in a burn layer in various storage rooms in Jericho, because the text tells us they attacked in the spring. Now, a smart invader would wait until they nommed all the food, right? And so they're going to besiege the place for a long siege. They don't have much food left, but they did it right after they'd harvested all the barley. The cupboard was full. And they found all kinds of full grain storage jars in the context of this collapsing of the walls and the defeat of the city and a massive burning of the city that doesn't seem to make sense with any kind of a besieging strategy. So, quickly then, this is a Logos infographic. You have Jericho, an oval-shaped tell. You have an upper wall and a lower wall, and it's built on a brick. The bottom wall is built on a brick, big revetment wall, a support wall, with a ditch around the city. Here's another image of these two walls. So imagine, let's say Joshua at the bottom. It's a person to help you see the scale of this. You have a stone revetment wall on the bottom left, clay wall, top and bottom, with a kind of a rocky surface that would have made it harder to clamber up. No plants to grab onto. It was a defensive measure. And so talk about huge human obstacle. This thing is tough to take. Another picture. Again, these walls are made of clay brick, and the bottom one is on top of this stone retaining wall that would have been very big and very tall. And as a human being, as an attacker, it's like, their walls reach to the sky. Like the slaves, the spies came back from checking out the land, which was way big hyperbole, but still daunting. All right, so when we think about areas of agreement, we have also this. This is from Kathleen Kenyon's own archaeological records. And she's showing that the walls collapsed outward. So you had the wall in the top of the yellow there, that revetment wall, the one back here at the bottom, see in the bottom right, those guys are standing. There's a stone retaining wall with a clay wall on top of it. So here the yellow is that revetment wall, the retaining wall. And the clay that was on the top of the revetment wall and the clay bricks that were on top of the hill, big obstacles, whoomp, they fell out to massive obstacles, become a ramp for the Israelites to come running up to the top. Here's here where the Italians are digging, you have this stone revetment wall here. You can't see it very well, rain and wind. I have other pictures that show archaeologists standing there pointing at more visible layers of laid down clay bricks, and up above I have pictures of it, but this is the one I grabbed. There's a mud brick. Those are mud brick collapsed walls there. They've fallen down, and those are mud bricks that are there. Here are some of the storage pots full of grain they found in a burn layer at Jericho, full of barley, which makes no sense because most attacks of a city like that are going to starve them out. Here's a place they dug, and you have burn layer along with broken jars that were eventually covered by dirt in that collapsed area. All right, so what we have here is, I'm trying to show you there are some areas where the phenomenon of what's discovered and what's described in the Bible seem like they work well together, right? But Kenyon dates, because of pottery for the most part, Kenyon dates the destruction of the city to 1550 BC, 150 years before the biblical chronology, I would say, suggests the conquest took place under Joshua. It doesn't help anybody's date of the Exodus and conquest. There's when evangelicals, there's a 15th century date of the conquest, the early date, 1406 BC, and there's a late date held by evangelicals about 1260 BC. It doesn't help either of us. If they're saying legend, that's what it is. Okay, here's a flaw. And hang with me here. Kenyon's decision about the date of this destruction involved the absence of Cypriot bichrome pottery. Okay, a red flag should pop up. Because I didn't observe that they moved the furniture around doesn't mean it didn't happen, right? The negative absence of evidence. So what she does is she takes the city of Megiddo, a very significant city in a major crossroads with 26 layers of occupation, and she looks at that typology of pottery. Oh yeah, here's all the late bronze pottery. Oh yeah, here's the middle bronze pottery, and they have this is like a standard to compare other places to. And she's going to, by comparing it to what they found at Jericho, she's going to say, that's why it has to be 1550. Hold with me here. So we talked about Middle Bronze and Late Bronze at the beginning. Middle Bronze up through 1550, right before the time of Moses' birth. Late Bronze after that, 1550 through about 1200. All right, so she not only she didn't find this Cypriot bichrome pottery, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. She said that the Middle Bronze pottery found in Jericho, the pottery found in Jericho doesn't match what was found for the Late Bronze period in Megiddo. Now hang with me here. So here's the deal. Here's what she's saying. So notice this little chart. It's not in your notes, or maybe it is. Yeah, I put that in. So she says, here's Megiddo and here's Jericho. Middle Bronze pottery, they both have it. Late Bronze pottery, she says, Megiddo, yes. Jericho doesn't have any. Only Middle Bronze. How about the Late Bronze Cypriot bichrome pottery? Because it was in the Late Bronze period and that was imported from Cyprus. Megiddo has it, Jericho doesn't. And then Iron Age pottery, Megiddo has it, Jericho doesn't because it's gone. So because of what she didn't find in Jericho compared to what was found in Megiddo, kind of makes it obvious, right? Nobody was there. They were there in the Middle Bronze period, and of course they're not there later because the place is destroyed. So it's this absence of Late Bronze pottery and absence of Late Bronze Cypriot bichrome pottery that was the evidence for putting it in 1550 BC, which is the end of the Middle Bronze period. Is anybody here with me? Okay, I got three back there. You're with me. No, I saw some nodded heads. When I teach in class and I ask a yes/no question, I don't even get a nod of the heads. It's like, hello, are you out there? Because if I ask a yes/no question, I don't get an answer. It's like, so are you thinking something else? So anyway, I like the response, like this highly energy using nodding of the head is helpful. All right, then the last thing is, one of the distinctive aspects of the Late Bronze pottery is this introduction of Cypriot bichrome pottery. It's evidence of the opening up of the Syrian coastal trade with the Eastern Mediterranean. And so the absence of that, as in this chart, it's at Megiddo, it's not in Jericho, is a massive part of her conclusion. Didn't find it, no Late Bronze pottery, and I have a question mark by both of them, because I'm going to try to blow up those ideas. All right, so here's some Cypriot bichrome, kind of two-color pottery. It was something that was occurred in that Late Bronze period from 1550 to 1200 BC, and it was found in numerous cities in Israel in the Late Bronze period. That was a result of trade with Cyprus. And so, problem with flaw number one. Most importantly, my argument would be it's a massive methodological flaw to make a sweeping conclusion based on what you haven't found, especially when you keep in mind of the random and partial and scattered nature of archaeological evidence. We're dealing with very little, a small percentage of what was deposited to make sweeping conclusions about whether the biblical text is telling us rightly. Okay, another thing is the very fact that Jericho has no imported Cypriot bichrome pottery should not be surprising since Jericho is not on a major trade route. So Kenyon herself wrote, in the footnote, you have all the stuff in the bottom, the footnotes. Kenyon herself wrote about Jericho. The picture given is that of simple villagers. There's no suggestion at all of luxury. It was quite probable that Jericho at this time was something of a backwater, away from the contact with richer areas provided by the coastal route. Okay, so she didn't really acknowledge that Jericho was off the beaten path. So here's a map of, so here's the International Coastal Highway. It comes from Mesopotamia through Damascus, through Hatzor, down along the coast. This is not an international route. This is an internal route, the way of the patriarchs, if you will. Here's the King's Highway. What's in the middle of nowhere? Jericho. It's not even on this map. You know, it just is 9-acre site. It's not very big. There's no major roads going to it. If you wanted to get there, you could get there, for sure. Old Testament times is kind of a backwater place. And this is what you want to think about. Here's Megiddo over here, a major trade center. I mean, the International Coastal Highway goes through Megiddo. It's a major point of access. 26 occupation layers. Thutmose III, before he conquered Megiddo, he said the conquering of Megiddo is like the conquering of 1,000 cities. So if you're going to set up a marketing branch for your Cypriot bichrome pottery, this is one place you're going to have to go. And then the point is on the one hand, Kenya, when she makes a big deal about the absence of Cypriot bichrome pottery, what about that town in Appalachia, up in the hills? Does it have all the Nordstrom gear up there? I know. The issue is to conclude based on what you haven't found, in a fairly obscure place, comparatively speaking, not on any of the major trade routes, not a problem. And then the other thing she misses out on, she paid no attention to the low-grade imitations of this bichrome pottery found in Jericho that are relatively abundant in the excavations done by Garstang and even Kenya. This is like Walmart bichrome pottery, homemade, knockoff. In Israel, in Bethlehem, you have a Stars and Bucks coffee place. Yeah, they really. So it's a knockoff. She didn't pay attention to that at all. The fact that they were aping, it's like, let's be like Megiddo and have our own, so at least we think we're big dog stuff. We have our own bichrome pottery. And the other thing that's sad, when she says there's no late bronze pottery found there, guess where she didn't look? She dug in 226 square areas in Jericho. She didn't go to the warehouse in London where Garstang stored all of his pottery. Now, Brian Wood wrote an article in 1990 in Biblical Archaeological Review that made a lot of people unhappy because up to that point, there wasn't a voice out there in that world that was saying 1400 BC conquest. He did his PhD in, I'm very glad I did what I did and not what he did. He did his PhD at the University of Toronto in Palestinian ceramic pottery. And you know where he spent his time studying for his dissertation? In the warehouse in London. He didn't even go to Jericho until later on in his life. But he pored over all of the records that Garstang left, demonstrating an abundant presence of late bronze pottery that was allegedly missing. So then my point is that the narrative that almost every archaeologist in Israel, there are evangelicals, so I'm not including them all in that, the consensus, the broad consensus is that what Joshua 6 describes never happened. That it's a legend. It's a nice legend, but it's still a legend because there's absolutely zero archaeological evidence. What I'm saying is what they did find matches up amazingly with Joshua 6. I think it matches up with the biblical understanding of chronology, and the absence of the things they refer to weren't absent. Present in knockoffs, like the Cypriot bichrome pottery, and present in the storage warehouse in London that Garstang left behind with all of his records. All right, there's a second flaw. This is not as big, and that is because you can't do everything, right? Digs cost money. She dug in these 226 square foot squares, and so you're saying that I can come to a solid conclusion about the dating of Jericho that overthrows what the text clearly says based on these two squares, and is fundamentally based on what I didn't find in those two squares. So that doesn't prove that the Joshua 6 narrative occurs like I said it did in 1400 BC, but it definitely doesn't allow for a sweeping dismissal of that intersection of history and archaeology. So then just to wrap up Jericho, just these parallels, it's just interesting to see that the correlation between the two, the biblical text and the way they found. The city was strongly fortified, 2 walls, Israel's attack of Jericho occurred just after harvest in the spring. It says that in the text. It was at flood stage when they crossed the Jordan. It was not long after flood stage when you have harvest of the barley. The barley's harvest, the very first harvest, it's April, May. And so it's in the spring. The inhabitants had no opportunity to flee with their food supplies because all those full jars are found there. The siege of the city was very brief. They didn't eat through what they had there. The walls of the city were leveled in most places as part of the city's destruction. In every place they've dug around the perimeter of the tell, except for one place, they found walls that fell out, which is not going to be caused by an earthquake, if you know how that works, which some of you do very well. It goes all over the place. So that suggests something kind of unique. The city was not plundered in the sense of you have that all kinds of things ended up in another people group. Some stuff was burned right there in situ, like those massive jugs full of grain that would have done really good for a traveling people, not settled in the land yet. And the city was burned, massive burn layers found all throughout the city. So it is amazing how closely that follows Joshua 6, and yet the archaeology, in my mind, doesn't dismiss the possibility of that intersection. Okay, more quickly. Your clock, did you not turn it on? That means I have all the time I want, right? I don't have a watch, I have nothing, so it's not my problem. So we have the location. Yeah, does grace abound, the sin should abound? Is that kind of what we're thinking about here? Location for biblical eye. I'm just going to go quickly here. Scholarly consensus, again, is legend. Joseph Calloway, who did a major dig there in the 60s, he said, Ai is simply an embarrassment to every view of the conquest that takes the biblical and archaeological evidence seriously. So if you're going to try to do both seriously, you're going to have to realize this is a good story, but not at all historical. Two others. In a later article by Calloway, he agrees with another scholar that the archaeology has wiped out the historical credibility of the conquest of Ai as reported in Joshua 7 and 8. There's zero evidence for it in the late Bronze period. So it couldn't have been this place that Joshua and his men attacked twice. More recently, another archaeologist, Amahai Mazar, wrote, there's no evidence of a second millennium Canaanite city at this spot. It's called Et Tel, the hill, or at any other site in the region. This constitutes unequivocal archaeological evidence for the lack of correlation between the story in Joshua 8 with all of its topographical details and historical reality corresponding to the period of the conquest. And when you read Joshua 8, it's like you have a map, and by the way, if you took out a map, and I didn't get that put in, if you had a map and you were following through, it's like, that's exactly the way they would go. And he said it was just a bunch of effort for nothing because it has no evidence is found. Well, you have a couple of ways of responding to that, and there's a conservative reply. And I'm going to just summarize this more quickly. There's a site called Khirbet Ruin, is the word Khirbet al-Makader. An organization called the Associates for Biblical Research have led the charge to affirm that a site named Khirbet al-Makader satisfies the biblical criteria for biblical eye. And I've dug there and know these guys, and I'm okay with that conclusion. I mean, they found a small burn layer, they found a gate, they found some walls. It's a little underwhelming, but it could have been a smaller eye than maybe we anticipated. But still, they have found late Bronze Age material there. So it's a half a mile away from Et Tel. But there's another site, the traditional site for Ai, Et Tel, is, and I'm going with totally anecdotal evidence. I have a couple of friends who their fingers and toes are in archaeology, and they've said they've done a survey of Et Tel, and I walked with them one of the times, and they found just near surface level late Bronze Age pottery. And I'm told by them as well, and they've investigated it, that in Calloway's records there's evidence of late Bronze Age pottery he didn't talk about in his conclusions. So regardless of whether it's Khirbet al-Makader or the traditional site for Et Tel, those two guys are working together to get a dig done under the Palestinian Authority at Et Tel That's going to last a year or two, because once they publish anything that talks about this kind of buttresses Joshua 8, that Israel's antiquity of their claim to the land, that plug is going to be pulled. But anyway, I think there are a couple of options to say, no, there is evidence of late Bronze Age activity at Tel. So here's on the right is at Tel, and just little valley hill, and there's Kiryat Makata on the left. So both of these, the Et Tel was the big walls, significant buildings, abundant pottery, and then Kiryat Makata a little less so. But there is an answer that works with the biblical narrative. And I wanted to do this too, but ran out of time. It's kind of fun. And I'd hoped to do this with the inerrancy session, but didn't get it done. I played too many computer games. Not. No, I've been burning the midnight oil. One of the things in my mind that's really encouraging is the topography matches Joshua 8 so well. I mean, you hear this map, this even a Google Earth shot. In my geography class I'm teaching, we went through this last week. As you look at how the Israelites came out of that second battle with Joshua, they came to the north of the city, across a valley from Ai. And they put folks in ambush just to the north of the site between Ai and Bethel. And you look at the map, like, that's where they were. And yeah, that's where they were. The topography that's described in the text matches the topography of the land, just amazingly. The inerrancy use of that information had some other narratives I was hoping to show you, but just I'll let you know now. I don't know of a place where we have confirmed sites where the Bible gets the geography wrong. It gives details of geography that couldn't have been written by a person long removed who was shooting from the hip, that was passed on in a harem-scarum, change this, fix that, insert this, remove that, and have the throwaway details like topographical features and geographic place names exactly where they're supposed to be. So it doesn't prove my thoughts about the historicity of what's said in Joshua 8, but it demonstrates they can't just be dismissed as if there's zero evidence for late Bronze activity in the region where these battles took place. All right, we're going to move on to United Monarchy, and I seriously have no idea what time it is. I have an hour and 1 minute. So what time is it? I shut off my phone. I'll turn it back on. 4:45. I have until when? 10 minutes. Okay. I'm going to act as if I didn't hear that. Okay. What proof does he have? This says an hour and a minute. All right. So I'm going to fly through this. The point is, when you think about the debate about David and Solomon, it's more complicated than you care to know. But you have, on the one hand, the biblical narratives. There's minimalism out there. Minimalism involves liberals on steroids, all right? So they're the ones who deny historical credibility to much of the Old Testament. They would see the Bible is put together very, very late, exilic, Hasmonean, even Hellenistic period, or that's before Hasmonean, and very, very late and kind of thrown together. And so you have an example. Lemke is there's 4 or 5 guys that are especially significant with minimalism. He says, I propose we decline to be led by the biblical account. That's kind of a roundabout way of saying toss it out the window as historical material, and instead regard it like other legendary materials as essentially or non-historical. This is as a source which only exceptionally rarely can be verified by other information. If it's not verified by archaeology, then forget about it. And so there are some others I quote here. I'm going to skip over. So the issue is it's a legitimate question when you think about, were David and Solomon historical, number one, as individuals? Number two, is the reign that the Bible describes for them historical? So I say here, When you think about the extent of Solomon's kingdom according to the Old Testament, here's this map, and you have a demonstration of Saul's kingdom, David and Solomon's kingdom, and so on, how expansive it was. Now keep this map in mind, because when I get to show you a minimalist conclusion, it's going to be a massive difference. So that's the question. And so they debate David's history as well as the extent of the reign the Bible gives to David. They say that for them, Saul, David, and Solomon are the stuff of legends, like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. David Ushishkin says, I'm afraid that evidence regarding the magnificent Solomonic capital was not discovered because it's non-existent, not because it's still hidden in the ground. Another guy talks about this negative as evidence. But then they found, I'm going to go on past this, the minimalist view of the United Monarchy. They believe that all the traditional theories of the United Monarchy are unfounded. But then they found this Tel Dan Stela. There's a place up north, Tel Dan, beautiful, beautiful place in the north at the foot of Mount Hermon, where at a 5th century gate area, and it's a fun story to tell, but I don't have time. The trapdoor. Remember this trapdoor? In the reuse of rocks to build this wall, a third gate area for Tel Dan, they had the surveyor, photographer, staff person had come back to do some sightings and was coming down the hill, and right time, right place. She puts her stuff down because it's coming out of her arms, and she looks up, and right in front of her is a stone with writing on it in a wall. And so they come pull it out, and it's this. And they found another 2 pieces in the next year, and it's called the Tel Dan Stela. And the interesting thing is right here, right here in Paleo Hebrew, this is the transcription, there's the photo right here, it says, the house of David. Now in the text, it's written by a Syrian Aramean king, and he's boasting about stuff that aren't true because I accept the Bible over his word. He said that I was able to put to death Jehoram, the king of Israel, and Ahaziah, the king of the house of David. Now, it's a bunch of baloney because the text tells us Jehu did that. That's another story. But the interesting thing is this is what people said was the first extra-biblical reference to David as beginning a dynastic royal line. And ghosts don't do that, right? That means he's a historical person. And again, as I was saying before, I slept at night just fine before this was discovered in full confidence of the texts of Samuel and Kings that describe David's reign. And when I talk to my students about this, gives this conclusion greater credibility. It's not for me, it's for that larger audience. That when you find something outside of the Bible that confirms something in the Bible, it gives that reality greater credibility to the larger audience. Well, when you think about this, after they found this, of course, there's a lot of weaseling going on. The consensus view today is that the expression House of David refers to the dynastic name of the kingdom of Judah. Lemchi is one of the guys weaseling to try to say it's the house of Dode, it's this, it's that, it's the other thing. And they still sometimes don't accept it. But the point is that gives us some encouragement about David being a historical person. Now, I want to make sure before I go on and talk about another guy, when you think about maximalism, my students always face this struggle. A maximalist is not just people like us who believe the Bible is authoritative, inspired, inerrant, and totally credible historically. No, they're non-minimalists. You could have liberals who believe in historical credibility of significant sections of the Old Testament who are maximalists. The point is, minimalists are the liberals who are on steroids. They're the ones that kind of reject all historical credibility, and so just make sure you realize maximalist is a broad term that occurs to describe a larger audience. Okay, there's this other guy here, and I mentioned him for a reason, Finkelstein, Israel Finkelstein, a significant Israeli archaeologist, just retired from the University of Tel Aviv University. He's done a number of things that I can't go into here. But he wrote a book on David and Solomon with a co-author, and he said these things are absolutely true about the United Monarchy and David and Solomon. Zero sign of monumental architecture in Jerusalem in the 10th century, the century of David and Solomon. In the 10th century, Jerusalem was no more than a small, poor highland village, not a capital of a kingdom. No evidence for widespread literacy that would accompany a widespread monarchy until the end of the 8th century. No evidence of David's conquests. Of course, conquests don't always leave evidence behind, but no sign of grand-scale building at Megiddo, Hatzor, and Gezer. And Solomonic mining of copper proved to be a fantasy. And so he says David's historical, but he's just a troublemaker. He's at the bottom quote, according to Finkelstein, David made a transition from a regional bandit to a regional chieftain, exercising control over a small area of Israel. So I'm going to go here and go past those quotes. Here's what the widespread scholarly consensus, including archaeologists who aren't just like us, ESV Study Bible, but they're saying that in their writings, this is David's Jerusalem, a significant city with a palace. Here's Solomon's Jerusalem with a temple, with his palace, a significant place, a regionally significant kingdom. This is Israel Finkelstein. And that's this little circle around Jerusalem, a little tiny wedge of land, the city of David. And these guys are like village mayors. They're not kings. This is not like a kingdom. Okay, we're going to grant that they could have been historical. But that's as far as we'll go. Because the Bible can't be relied upon to be embraced for this historical reality. And I have a reason why I think we can. Iron Age Jerusalem. And again, why has so little evidence of early Iron Age Jerusalem been found? And I'm going to do a short version, and that is, you have a little wedge of land, about 9 to 11 acres. If you think back to the picture here, right there, see this little wedge of land is called the Eastern Hill. It's Mount Moriah. This is the city of David, and so those buildings are all on top of the bedrock at the top of the hill. And when the Babylonians come in and destroy the city of David as well as the rest of the city of Jerusalem, devastate it, and you have folks come back to live there, what are they going to do with the broken down, burned buildings that were left behind? They're going to knock them down or remove them to build new ones. What does that do to archaeological evidence? It removes it. Later on, when you think about Solomon, think about this city here, right? Here. So Solomon's temple is up there at the top, but the Temple Mount is a box that kind of covers that. So some of what would have told us about Solomon is buried underneath the box of the Temple Mount. So when you say we haven't found a lot about David and Solomon, that isn't an evidence against their historical existence. It's like the cards are playing against us because a lot of it is covered or a lot of it has been removed over time. Having said that, I had the notes, but removed them. A stepped stone structure, a large stone structure. There are other evidence where they found Iron Age, David, Solomon era pottery, clearly found in the city of David. That's underneath the foundation stones for I would call it a big dog construction project. It isn't something I would do for the Grisanti house, right? Massive, it's called a large stone structure. Guess why? It's got large stones. It's got stuff that you wouldn't do as an individual. You'd have to have a big working crew to put together a building, maybe a palace like that. Okay, then, problem of negative evidence, I've already talked about it, and that is it's always questionable to sweep aside biblical statements based on what is not found, right? It isn't like it doesn't have a role to play in our thought process. But you do want to realize that there's more of the story I want to understand before having that as my one or two argument. It has to be like 27. And I'm looking for positive evidence. And two archaeologists who are non-conservatives will say, beware of historical conclusions based on negative or scanty evidence. from small-scale excavations conducted at hill country sites such as Jerusalem, which was a small city at the time of David. All too often, such negative or scanty evidence reflects on a site's present state of preservation more than on its historical development. So if you come at it with a kind of a negative assumption about the history of that region, you're going to be able to reject it. Now, I have 3 minutes, I think. So I just want to get through this. You remember Finkelstein had that list of things he said were absolutely clear. One was no regional government. Another one was no widespread literacy. All right, so here's Kiapha is a place, a ruin of Kiapha, found at a border location. This is the valley we're talking about. This is the Elah Valley. Battle of David and Goliath took place over there. Saul's camp would have been, the Israelites would have been here, Philistines over here, and Kiapha is up there. Now, so they found this is from the Satellite Bible Atlas, same thing, again. Kiapha is right here, Battle of David and Goliath there, Philistines all the way around here, Israelite army here, 1 Samuel 17. I want to end my sermon on Sunday just looking at that passage quickly. Kiapha. Okay, it's this really one primary layer site. It's not a complicated deal. And so you have these two gates, one gate here to the west, one gate here to the south. It's got, and I'm going to move on here, the pottery they found there, everybody in Israel, all the archaeologists agree it's Iron Age. Iron Age, I think it's 2. But it's in the time of David and Solomon. The vast majority say that. They also did, they found in a garbage dump, if you will, a garbage pit, they found olive pits that have organic matter in them and sent them off for carbon dating. I'm not a big carbon dating fan, but I'm not talking about tens of thousands of years. And they have a probability level of about 70% in the time of David and Solomon. That just kind of matches the pottery. You have casemate walls. These are these double walls, all around 2/3 of the city. Some of them are 12 feet between. And again, in some of those walls have 4-ton stones in them. It's 100,000 tons of stone that go into the wall around the settlement. So let's say the Grisanti and the Pereiras and, the various brothers, we're going to get our sheep and our goats together and have a common pooled effort to have a nice sheepfold, goat fold. Can we pull that off? No, what does this indicate? A building like this in the time of David and Solomon suggests a bureaucratic government in place that could pull off a massive labor effort to provide a border settlement at a border location with the bad guys, with the Philistines. Palace of David, Yossi Garfinkel is trying to get fundraising for the next year called the Palace of David, way overstated it, but it was an administrative center, a big building, thick walls. So here this administrative center was found, a big storeroom full of, I think it was 40 pottery jars with a seal on they call lamellic seals for the king that are normally for the monarchy period. They're things that are royal authority. They're being provided for royal responsibilities. Okay, so you have this reconstruction of the administrative center here. It's kind of a model somebody drew for Kiapha. The point is, though, you also have here an inscription, and I'm going to fly through this. There's Rensburg, who is not a conservative, says, taken together with another ABC text showing writing, the Telzide Abecedary, the Kiapha inscription of the Gezer calendar, demonstrate that writing was well established in the 10th century Israel. Certainly sufficient so for many of the works later incorporated into the Hebrew Bible that have been composed at this time. The point is he's blowing out of the water what Finkelstein says, absolutely zero evidence for any kind of literacy in the time of David and Solomon. Well, I like this place. Okay, and here's the inscription itself, and there's more debate about what it says. Anyway, I was going to insert some stuff here. I think I just have... De Vries, a scholar, writes, in the final analysis, archaeological evidence is always a silent or mute kind of evidence, so you can't conclude too much from it. And I would say it needs to be connected with biblical evidence like the Bible. I think the Bible is important. That intersection of the two is important. I do have an assumption that has a high view of the text that brings me to archaeology. So a careful consideration of these intersections of biblical and archaeological studies lends credence to the history described by the biblical narrative. It doesn't prove it, but it's a feasible, a plausible intersection. Archaeology should limit the sweeping statements often made by critical scholars by which biblical narrative descriptions of various peoples or events are viewed as purely legendary. And so when you're sitting there watching that Discovery Channel show and you want to throw the remote at the TV, not that you'd ever think that, just say, take a chill pill. Say, I know better. There are places I can read that help me realize there's other conclusions based on the evidence that are out there. Instead of focusing on what might not have been found, we need to realize that many excavations demonstrate that biblical narratives carry a ring of truth. That is a plausibility that is supported by what has been found in the dirt. And then, anyway, so here are two things I'm going to post. This is from the Biblical Archaeological Review. It's a prof at Purdue University. He's done a few more of these. But these are 50 individuals that have been evidenced in history by 3 kinds of sources. And so there's another article that you can access through the BAR website that has all of the fuller justification, just as a kind of go-to reference. We'll post that in a more readable form with the other materials on the website. All right. Lord bless you. Let's transition to the next deal.